Sarah, and this is the Scientist of the Month virtual story time. Since April has Earth Day and Earth Week later this month, our scientist is an environmentalist. What do you think an environmentalist might do? They might do something to study the Earth. That's a good idea. What else might they do? They might go out in nature, make some observations. And what would those observations do? Would they help people and animals somehow? I think you are on the right track. Our scientist this month is environmentalist Rachel Carson, who discovered how some of the chemicals and things that were being used in the 1960s were actually really harmful to people and to animals in the environment. So we're going to learn all about how she became an environmentalist and what her work means for us now, today. Tune in next week for Miss Erin's virtual how-to, and she'll teach you how to make a nature journal so you can make the same kinds of observations when you go out in nature the way that Rachel did, not only when she was a child, but as she grew up into an environmentalist. Our book is called Spring After Spring, How Rachel Carson Inspired the Environmental Movement. It is words and pictures by Stephanie Roth-Sisson. It's read with permission of Roaring Book Press. It was dawn when the chorus began. Cheerily, cheep, cheep. Rachel didn't want to miss a note, so she ran downstairs and outside. Squeak! Caw! Caw! Cheer! Cheer! Hello! She called. As the midday sun warmed the earth, other musicians chimed in. Life and music were all around. What kind of animals does Rachel hear? Can you look at the picture and find some of the animals that she hears? Yeah, there's a bee, bzzing, and a hummingbird, and a chipmunk. And there were wonders, big and small. Spring was Rachel's favorite time of year. As the sun set, she could hear the first bubbles of frog song. Crickets began their nighttime tune, and bats squeaked a lullaby. At home, there was a warm supper and a big family. Mom played the piano, and Dad sang songs and read stories. Rachel's favorites were those about the sea. As the days grew longer and warmer, the chattering, chirping, and hooting got louder. What do you notice in the picture? Why would there be more noise? That's a great observation. There are baby animals. There's a fawn and some fox kits and fledgling birds. Until the gathering calls from migrating birds meant that it was autumn. They were coming together for their long journey through the ocean of air to their wintering homes. Honk, honk, called the geese as they flew away. But not everyone left. Many animals were hibernating under the ground. Snuggled under a warm blanket, Rachel drew pictures and wrote about the life she experienced all year. She read books about animals and imagined what their lives were like. Spring after spring, year after year, the birds arrived. Every season, Rachel watched, listened, and wrote. And like the nestlings, she grew quickly. Then one autumn, it was time for her to go off to college. She was sure she wanted to be a writer. until she looked through a microscope and saw a small world in a drop of water, tiny sea plants and animals. Rachel was amazed and in love. She wanted to know more about the very small world made visible by a microscope. She'd never been to the ocean and was scared to go in the water. To learn about the creatures in tidal pools, marshes, and the sea, Rachel decided that she would study biology, the study of living things. She put her writing aside. After she finished school, Rachel worked as a scientist and compiled information about the ocean. Now, for her job, she wanted to know what it was like to actually be underwater. She was still scared, but she went anyway. In the fish world, many things are told by sound waves, she wrote. Rachel began to write books about the sea. They were so full of scientific detail and vivid descriptions of the lives of sea creatures that people could imagine those worlds. Rachel became a famous author, but there was something wrong. All around, nature's voices were going quiet. So Rachel did what she did best. She watched closely, listened carefully, and learned as much as she could about what was happening. Rachel put together scattered facts and found the answer. If you look at the picture on this page, can you find some clues about what might be happening? What do you notice? Yeah, there's some weird green smoke coming off that airplane. And what about the fish on the beach? Oh, they're not okay. They're dead fish? Something must be very wrong. Let's see if Rachel figured it out. People wanted to kill bugs that ate their plants, bothered them, and sometimes even made them sick. Chemists created new poisons to solve the insect problems that seemed to work and seemed to be harmless to other creatures and humans. These poisonous chemicals were quickly used everywhere in huge amounts because people thought that they were safe. But Rachel found evidence, she found proof that the poisons were not safe. It was a dangerous cycle. The poison was eaten by microscopic water life. The water life was eaten by tiny fish. And the tiny fish were eaten by bigger fish. And the bigger fish were eaten by an eagle. And then the eagle eggshells were so thin that they broke during incubation and never hatched. The poison would coat worms. And the worm would get eaten by a bird. And the bird ate many, many worms coated by the poison. And the bird died. Poison coats worms and insects. Worms and insects are eaten by a bird, and the bird is eaten by a fox, and the fox eats birds, mice, and other animals that all have eaten the poison, and then that fox died too. Rachel wrote a book to tell people about what she had learned. The book, called Silent Spring, created a huge ruckus. Some people were inspired to change, but many didn't believe Rachel. Eventually, President Kennedy took notice and began an investigation to find out what was true. Rachel was asked to come to Washington, D.C. and defend her book. She was scared, but she went. Rachel's testimony in Washington and her writing in Silent Spring made people see that they have an effect on the environment and the other creatures that they share the world with. People were inspired to speak up. Congress passed new laws so nature was treated with more care, and some of the most harmful chemicals were banned. Spring after spring, year after year, people celebrated the earth and the environment because Rachel showed them how beautiful and precious it is. But Rachel went home and continued watching and listening. In the morning, she went out among the tide pools and gathered specimens. In the afternoon, she carefully studied them and took notes on her observations. And in the evening, when the tide had gone out again, she returned each creature with great care, exactly in the spot she had found it, exactly where it belonged. There's an author's note at the end. Let's read it. I have long loved Rachel Carson's writing, especially her books about the wonders of nature, where she writes so poetically about science. But her most famous book, Silent Spring, is hard for me to read because it's a warning about what happens when people are not careful. Silent Spring is one of those rare books that changes the way a whole society thinks. In the 1950s, people thought science could solve all their problems and that nature could be controlled through chemicals. No one questioned that, except Rachel Carson. In a 1963 TV interview, Rachel said, "The balance of nature is built on a series of relationships between living things and their environment." Rachel knew chemicals had their place, but she asked people to slow down and look carefully at what they were doing, and to understand that by affecting the tiniest creature, they were influencing the whole web of life, including humans. In the end, I realized Silent Spring is about ecology and the wonders of nature, just like all of her other books, and I came to love it as well. Rachel died on April 14th, 1964, just 2 years after writing Silent Spring. She was 57 years old. She never saw the full impact of her work. Silent Spring led to the formation of the Environmental Protection Agency, and it inspired people to try to find less harmful ways to deal with pests, and is widely seen as the beginning of the environmental movement, which led to the creation of Earth Day. Rachel Carson gave a voice to nature and an awareness of people's connection to our fragile planet. However, pesticides and herbicides are still used in large quantities all over the world, and they still negatively affect many animal species as well as humans. There's still much to learn about the relationship between living things and their environment, and this knowledge is crucial to understanding climate change. Today, Rachel's writing is as important as ever. Hopefully, you can go out in nature and make some observations of your own. Make sure that you're doing your part to keep our Earth safe for everyone on it and everything on it. All of our kits this month are related to the environment. So make sure that on Thursdays at 4:30, you come by the library for one of our great eco-conscious kits this month. That's all the time we have for today. I'll see you next month for our next Scientist of the Month. Until then, keep dreaming and stay safe and healthy, friends.